Bishop, I'm gonna mute myself and hand it over to Bishop Ward.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate that. Ms. Reali, thank you for being a part of this process. We know that you were in the first part of the process for the primary, but now this is the final call as you prepare to run in the general election. And we're thankful that you became a part of this process. This is new to us as well, doing a virtual ratings and endorsement process. And we're thankful that you decided to be a part of that process. I'm looking at some of the questions and I'm going to steer away from some of them because they have nothing to do with domestic relations court. But I'm going to make sure that the questions we do ask you do have to deal with domestic relations court because you have been working as a magistrate in that court. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. Let me ask you first to tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us some information relative to your background and make sure that everybody knows as much as they need to know about you.
Okay, so I'm Colleen Reali, just for the camera purposes. I grew up in the city of Cleveland. I'm the second daughter of fairly modest folks. My mom is an immigrant. My dad was a working class person, is a working class person. He's now retired. He was a railroad clerk and member of a union, proud member of his union. I grew up in a very working class neighborhood. I come from a very working class background. My parents did the best that they could to give us the best education that they could afford. I received a scholarship to college. I put myself through law school. I attended both college and law school in New York City at Fordham University and then St. John's University Law School. I had 3 jobs while I put myself through law school. I came back home to Cleveland after I graduated from law school to be closer to my parents who were aging. I bought my first house in the city of Cleveland when I was 25 years old. I was a assistant county prosecutor for 14 years, where I worked as the community-based prosecutor for the community in which I lived, which was in the 2nd District. I lived in the Tremont neighborhood. So I worked with various community groups there. I ran for judge in 2012. I was the endorsed Democrat in the primary. I won my primary. I lost in a general election to an incumbent, Pamela Barker. And I learned a lot from that. And shortly after that, Francine Goldberg, who is the judge I currently work for as a magistrate in domestic relations court, won the seat in domestic relations court. We had worked together at the prosecutor's office. She asked me to join her as her magistrate. I never knew how much I would love domestic relations court because I hadn't practiced that up until 6 years ago, that type of work. And I went over to the domestic relations court, and I can say that I absolutely love the work that I do. Okay. It combines my litigation background with families. And I'm a mother myself. I'm married. I have a almost 7-year-old daughter. And I think because of the fact that I started there right around the time I became a mother, that I really learned that I enjoyed that work so much. And so I've been working as a magistrate in the court where I seek office. And I think that that's the reason why I decided to run for judge there, because I just enjoy the work so much. There's a lot of things we do well, but there's a lot of things I think we can change as well. So that's it.
Okay. What's your solution to address or curb domestic violence from a jurist perspective?
To curb domestic violence?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things we probably could be doing better. I would say early intervention would be the biggest thing. The second that we find out that things are happening like this in the home, I think we have to wrap that family in services to see if we can prevent future instances of domestic violence. So that would be from a jurist perspective. As a court, what we can do is probably provide as many services as possible, both to the alleged offender of the domestic violence, as well as the family who's the woman or man who's, the victim of domestic violence, and the children. Often there's children around too that are witnessing domestic violence, or they themselves are also victims of domestic violence. So our court does have a dedicated domestic violence docket We have 3 magistrates who work on only just our domestic violence issues. And unfortunately, there's a lot of them, and it seems to be getting worse. And so I believe that as a court, we just need to spend as much money. I mean, it costs money to do these programs. I think we're doing well as a court in addressing that. We've just recently added a magistrate to that docket. So we're addressing those issues, but obviously it's a really tough thing for a family to go through. And we have to protect the rights of the person who's being accused of domestic violence, while at the same time making sure that if domestic violence is happening in the home, we're providing the services that we have as a court to those folks to see if they can get help.
Cases of domestic violence are rising, especially during this pandemic. We've seen them on the rise. Do you believe that the court should make sure that there's a better investigation of cases before they come to the court?
Well, a better investigation. I think that it's important that if someone says that they're a victim of domestic violence, that we are immediately responsive to that. I think it's important that there's an avenue for someone who is saying that they're being abused at home, whether it's a man or a woman or a child, to be able to come to court right away. That's an exigent circumstance. So they need to be able to come right away. And that's why we allow them to come into court and file something right away. But we also have a hearing on it and have the folks present evidence right away too, to make sure that, someone's not just using the court and saying that there's a domestic violence occurring when it's not, which sometimes happens too. So I think, I think the way it's set up now is that we give victims that opportunity to get the help that they need right away, but we also check and make sure that the facts and the information are there before we're just signing off on orders, because we have to be careful, because when we sign orders, that's very impactful too. So it's a balancing act, and it has to be as quickly as possible for both sides of the argument.
Bipolar and mental illnesses are seemingly becoming a part of every area of court that judges have to deal with now. Should jurists do their best to make sure that in some of these cases, that the individuals get the help that they need before decisions are made, instead of sending people to prison, that they make sure that something can be done to help those families?
Absolutely. And obviously, we're finding out more and more that folks are being incarcerated for when they have underlying mental health issues. The prisons are being used as mental health hospitals because we're not providing, as a country, we're not providing those resources. But people really should be getting, mental health counseling and maybe, being housed in hospitals rather than in prisons, because they're a danger to themselves and often others. So that is a huge concern. It's not something that we deal with. I don't send people to prison. We don't incarcerate folks. Domestic relations court, thankfully, I don't have to make those decisions. However, we do see folks who are mentally ill. I mean, that certainly impacts families. And again, we do have services. We are able to provide services to help folks. And I say wrap around. We need to wrap families with the services that we have to make sure that they're getting the tools that they need so that they can function as a family. So a lot of the things that we talk about in the on the criminal side, we also talk about, in domestic relations court. And yes, that is necessary.
Okay. What do you perceive as the greatest obstacle in your division for domestic relations court? What do you see as a magistrate? What do you consider to be probably the greatest problem that domestic relations court has to deal with?
The biggest concern that I have in our court is that we have so many folks who are self-represented. Too many folks cannot afford attorneys. Attorneys are extremely expensive, and we have a very good group of attorneys that practice in our court and do an excellent job. But attorneys are expensive. And so people come to our court and they're seeking help and they can't afford an attorney. And now they've come to court and, they've even filed a motion with our help, but then it's time to litigate that motion, and it's too hard for them to do, and they're not getting the relief that they need because they don't have the tools to do it. Go ahead.
No. You finish. You finish
Okay.
first.
Okay.
Your answer is leading me into another question. But go on ahead. Are you finished?
No, not yet. So what I'd like to say is we have a help center at our court. It's something we started in the last couple of years. It's great, but we need to improve upon it because it's not getting on more complicated cases. It's very difficult for our self-represented folks, we call them self-represented now instead of pro se's, to get the relief that they need. And that is one of the reasons why I'm running. I have a lot of ideas about how we can improve things. And that I see as the #1 challenge in our court.
And with that, since you mentioned it, what do you see that you would promote as an improvement upon the domestic relations court that you would bring as becoming a judge?
So one of the things I'd like to do, and I have a lot of ideas about ways I'd like to improve the court. I think the judges that are there now are doing an excellent job, but there's always room for improvement and new ideas. I would like to make the help center, instead of it being something where we can't give legal advice, I'd like to have it manned by, or have persons working there that actually are lawyers. I think that we can fund the help center. There are certain restrictions, but I believe that we can use some of the court's money to have lawyers there to give folks the right advice, to perhaps tell them, hey, this is not something you can file a motion on, so they aren't wasting their time if they can't get relief, to help them file the proper motions, to make sure that their motions are being filed properly, that there are service and notice requirements that are being checked off, because just giving folks a piece of paper when you're not a lawyer to try to fill out and then get the relief that they need, 50% of the time they're coming to me, they've wasted all this time taking off work, and it's not the proper document. And I can't just do it. So I can't just rule on it when it's not legally right. So I want to make sure that if they're spending all this time going to court, that they're actually getting somewhere and we can help them. And that's the #1 reason why I'm running in this court, is to do that. I hope to do that.
Do you find that because you are providing legal forms for individuals in domestic relations court, that you're having a problem with the lawyers because of the fact that you're providing information that they would normally provide and get paid for, but you're helping the citizens at the same time? You find that being a problem?
Most of the lawyers are plenty busy and don't seem to have a problem with it. And I think what I've heard from the lawyers, and there's about 50 or 60 lawyers who do mostly domestic relations work. So it's like a niche practice. So you see a lot of the same lawyers. And I don't think they have a problem with the fact that we're helping self-representatives. I think they understand that there's a need for it. I think that they like my idea of having lawyers work there, just a couple of lawyers. I think a lawyer who's about to retire, who maybe wants to just take a little bit of a step back, and train a couple of new domestic relations lawyers. And I think that they see that as a great way to solve this problem. So I haven't gotten any pushback. Now maybe they're just being polite because I'm a magistrate and they don't like to tell me that they think I'm wrong. Okay. But I find that it's a well-received idea.
Okay. What changes
so
would you?
They're being sincere.
Okay. What other changes would you advocate for, and why would you advocate for them?
Well, before COVID, I talked a lot about how I felt the court wasn't as safe as it could be for the folks who come down there and the people that work there and the lawyers that practice there. Just the way we had it set up, just because it's an older and very beautiful building, and I love where I work, but it just, you had folks in the hallways together. It was often kind of a volatile situation. I just didn't feel like it was as safe as it could be. So that was one of the ideas that I had. I think the last time you interviewed me, I spoke about that. Now with COVID, we've really moved a lot more to Zoom meetings and pre-trials and even trials, if we can do it. People are spaced out. They're not folks aren't sitting on top of each other anymore, which I think is really positive. So I think that's sort of taking care of itself because of the crisis. Another thing that I find I see time and time again is that financial literacy is something that folks who are getting divorces and going through dissolution don't think too much about. And I think a lot of people don't contemplate that you're going to be now living in 2 separate households with the same amount of money coming in. And so I want to offer a financial literacy course. I think if we give folks the tools that they need before they go on to this next phase of their life, post-divorce with their children, that they'll function better and come back to court less. And that's better for everyone. Because if you spend all your time in court like some of the folks I see do, it's just not a great way to live, and it's terrible for children. So that is one of the other ideas that I have that I'd like to implement if I'm elected.
If you are elected, do you believe that a judge has ownership of the bench where they sit?
No, obviously the citizens do. I've been in government 22 years. We work for the people. And when the people speak, we must listen. And if you don't think that way, and if you don't feel that way, then you shouldn't be doing the work. We all know about the judges who get robitis. That's not a good thing, and they often have opponents. You have to understand that you're there because the people put you there, and you work for the people. And that's definitely something I think about. And let me say this too. I think, and I was speaking about it with someone today. If you don't have empathy, then you shouldn't be in government. You shouldn't be in a public service job. The number one, the most important quality for any judge or judge candidate is empathy. Be kind, have empathy, you'll do a good job.
So if you are elected, how would you use the power of the bench to bring about important changes to a judicial system that disproportionately affect people of color?
I think first of all, you have to talk about it. This is something we need to raise at the judges' meetings if they're not already talking about it. I'm not there yet, so I don't know what they're talking about, but I hope that they are talking about it. I mean, I think access to justice is something all elected officials need to be talking about. You shouldn't be in government if you're not talking about what's on the news and what's important to the people. And it's important to the people. I think that's abundantly clear after the last 3 or 4 weeks, that this is something that's important to all people. We're talking about it. We're hearing about it. We need to listen. And as judges, we need to make sure that our constituents, the people that we serve, know that we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, and we're addressing it.
Okay. How do you view technology being used to aid in the judicial process now that we've had to start using it? Would you advise it to be continued as such?
Absolutely. I think we're finding out more and more that we can do so much more through Zoom and telephone calls. I'm not 100% comfortable with having trials over Zoom. There's some legal issues that I think could come up just with actual trials. But all the pre-trials and everything that leads up to that, there is no sense in bringing folks down, making them take a day off work, making them sit in a hallway all day, so their attorneys can come and talk to the judges and they're not even seeing the judges or the magistrates half the time. That's just a waste of time for everyone. I was a big fan before COVID of doing pre-trials by phone and making sure we weren't having meaningless hearings, because that just wastes everybody's time and runs up the lawyers' bills. So that's not something that I was a proponent of anyway. And I think one of the upsides of COVID it's been able to illustrate and show us that we can do so much remotely. And that's better for everyone. It's better for us, from a safety standpoint because of the disease. It's better for all of us, but it's also better for everyone's pocketbooks. We're not wasting money on meaningless hearings. And wasting time and taking off work, like I said. And for some folks, it's really hard to get downtown, and it's really scary and really intimidating. And so anything we can do to make the process easier and still, serve the people that we serve, I'm for it.
Thank that's time, Bishop.
Oh, I was just getting ready to say, Councilor Reali, thank you very much for being a part of this process. Any closing words you'd like to have?
I just want to say that I appreciate so much that you had me in the last time, and it was a great experience. I'm sad that I don't get to see all of you this time, because I do like doing it in person. I think it's nice to sit down together and talk, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you. And I'm just, really excited about the fact that I won my primary, and I'm hoping with your help to prevail in the general election. And just thank you so much.